Litera Desktop is one of Litera's 3 platforms. We can think of Litera Desktop as the toolset that we need in order to effectively draft documents. As we take a document from first draft all the way through to final delivery, and we do that over many iterative versions, Litera Desktop gives me the tools that I need to accomplish those common drafting tasks. During this recording, we'll walk through a high-level demonstration of Litera Desktop. We'll hit on each individual module and ultimately how we typically see firms leverage this software. All right, now let's go ahead and start our example workflow. And in this scenario, we're going to go ahead and start from a template. Now, there's lots of different scenarios in which I may want to start from a template. I may have things like pleading templates that I can use to automatically generate captions. I might have letter, memo, fax templates, things that we would traditionally associate with templates. I may even have some precedent documents that we want to leverage as templates. Now, if I want, I could go through here and search for or manually identify the template that I'd like to generate, but more often than not, I'm going to have a set of documents that I frequently create. So if I do have that set of documents, maybe I'm a legal assistant and I frequently generate letters and envelopes, things like that, or maybe I'm a litigation paralegal and I frequently generate pleadings and certificates of service. Well, I can go through and save those specific items as my favorites. Now, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and grab this master services agreement because this gives us a good semi-generic document that we can walk through the rest of the demo with. Now, once we grab this document, I'm dropped into my template. I can go through and fill out each of the fields that needs to be completed in order to finish this template. Or if I've worked with this organization in the past and I've saved off information that I've used previously, well, then I can click the Apply Data button, grab my example data, and go through and very quickly populate this template. Now, we're going to go ahead and click Finish. And in our example workflow, this might be the end of our initial first draft, right? We've gone through, we've grabbed the template, we've applied some data to that template, and now I've kicked this out the door. But as always happens, more often than not, that document's going to come back to me, and it's going to come back to me with some comments. So let's go ahead and snag this document. And you can see this is the document that we sent out earlier, but it's got a little bit of information in it. We can see that someone has requested I put in a table of contents. If I continue to navigate through the comments here, I can see someone's requested a clause outlining a deposit amount. And as we continue down, I can see some requests for context around term and termination. So ultimately, this is typically we'll call this the step in my drafting lifecycle where I'm going to go through and start to identify content that I've used in the past that I might want to repurpose and put into this document. And this workflow is the same for nearly all of our legal drafters. Whether I'm a litigator, I've just gotten a new pleading, all the captions have been generated for that pleading, and I'm beginning to start to put good content on paper, I'll have things like standard jurisdictional text that I may want to lay out, right? So this need to go through and identify content that I've used in the past and then ultimately copy and paste it into a document that I'm using now is something that we wanted to help with, and that is what our content library is designed to do. I'm going to go ahead and start by clicking the Show Library button. And you'll notice that this gives me a directory of all the content that I've saved off. Now, in my example here, I'm practicing as a transactional attorney, so I have some default headings here. I have my clauses. This is the standard content that I've saved off to use, and this is my personal stuff. No one else has access to this. I have firm content, which I've called firm clauses. And again, this is that firm-wide content. These are things that everyone can see, but not everybody can write to these. Not everybody can make changes in here. The idea behind firm content is that this is curated content. And then finally, I have practice areas or shared folders. Now, functionally, these are shared folders. I can go through and create shared folders for individual practices, for individual clients. Now, ultimately, in our example here, I've created shared folders for individual practices. And if I wanted, I can go into one of those shared folders and retrieve content from it. Or, if I have permission to, I could save content in it. Ultimately, what this means is that it's really easy for me to go through and retrieve things that I've saved in the past. Now, before we go through and start to add content to this document, I do want to hop back up to that section where we need to insert our deposit clause And I want to talk about the existing workflow behind repurposing content. So when we think about how people do this today, you're going to go identify a document that you've worked on in the past, you're going to copy content out of that document, and you're going to paste it into the new document. When you paste it into the new document, you're going to manually go through and anonymize or redact information that you didn't mean to bring over, right? So if we're bringing over maybe a clause that we've used in the past and it contains a company name and a negotiable amount, well, I'm going to need to go ahead and manually get rid of those. And oftentimes, we're not just doing this for a single paragraph. We're doing it for many paragraphs at once or entire sections of documents. What that means is that that manual anonymization process is really time consuming, especially if I'm not the original author. If I don't know inside and out the document that I'm copying from, I have to manually go through and try to identify all that client-specific information that needs to be pulled out. And then once I paste it into the new document, I need to go through that really fun process of, copy, right-click, paste special, text only, reformat the content, and then as I go through and restyle or reformat my content paragraph by paragraph, I'm going to have to do things like get rid of extra headings and make sure that paragraph spacing is consistent, and it makes it really painful to go through that copy and paste process. So our goal was to fix both sides of that, the anonymization of prior client information and that formatting. So let's go ahead and save some content into our repository. I'll go ahead and grab this introductory paragraph, click Save, and I can go through and start to gather some information about this. We'll call this our example. I can add guidance if I want to. I can decide where to save this. And lastly, I have the option to automatically anonymize this content. Now this is going to read through and look for those things like client name, company name, dollar amounts that I would otherwise need to identify manually. We can see here the list of things that are being presented to us for anonymization. I can click OK, save this off, and know that all that content is going to be removed. Now, the other side of this workflow is inserting content into our document. So let's go ahead and insert this deposit clause as requested by this comment. We'll go ahead and drag and drop this in. And you'll notice that there is no right-click, paste special, format the paragraph, get rid of the duplicate heading or any weird paragraph spacing or things like that. It does it all for me. So I don't have to do any of that manual styling. This is going to go through and automatically insert content into my document. And to the best that we can, we're going to match that destination styling. Now let's go ahead and go down and continue adding some additional content in here. Looks like we have some requests for term and termination, so we'll go ahead and grab both of these. You'll notice that we can insert two things at once. And then lastly, we'll go through and insert this disclaimer clause. All right, and just like that, I've gone through and I've added all the content that I needed to add per the comments in this document. Now, if we scroll back up to the top, we saw that comment earlier about inserting a table of contents, so we'll come back to that. But that's the goal. We want to make it really easy to store and retrieve those pieces and parts of documents that you may want to use in the future. Now from here, I'm probably going to start to move into a process that we would call, proofreading or review, making sure that all the changes that I've made to my document are logical and consistent, making sure that I haven't introduced any issues when I repurpose content that I've used in the past. And to do that would typically be manual. I would just read through the document. I would look for things like defined term issues or cross-referencing issues or issues with the client-specific information, and then as I ran into them, I would manually correct them. Now the challenge with that is that you're always going to miss something. And ultimately, our objective is to help you as you go through that process and identify things that would otherwise be missed, things that would otherwise go out in a court filing, or things that would otherwise be sent to a client, right? We want to mitigate the risk of a document with errors heading out the door. So let's go ahead and continue to move down our ribbon here and click the Analyze button. Now this is going to read through our document and look for any potential issues with content. And you can see that it divides the potential issues into a number of pretty basic tiles: defined term issues, referencing issues, names, dates, things like that, numbering issues, so on and so forth. We're not going to click into all these, but let's go ahead and take a look at a few. In references, we can see that we have a reference to section 8.1, and that section is not found in this document. There is no section 8.1. So we can quickly go through and identify that that is an issue. I can gather some context. You'll notice that when I clicked it, it brought me to where this issue is in the document. And I can see that this is referencing warranties. So I can say, it looks like I probably want this to reference section 10, specifically 10.2. When I select that, I'm dropped into a split screen view so that I can quickly see the content of section 10.2 and make sure that this is accurate. And then if I'm ready to update that reference, I can click Assign, and that's going to go ahead and create a new reference for me. Now again, there's a ton of additional things that we could go through and look at in here, but I want to go through and round out by looking at numbering issues. Now you'll notice that in the content that we inserted earlier, we have a couple of numbering issues. And that's because when we saved this numbering was not automated. It was just plain text that we saved off. And as a result, when we inserted it, we matched the destination formatting, but it's still plain text, so the numbering hasn't updated. So you'll notice that in the repair group here, we have a number of one-click buttons that are going to help us go through and fix common problems or help us accomplish common tasks that we identified as pretty time-consuming as we go through our drafting process. Now, per its name, the Numbers button is going to go through and fix numbering. Right? So I click that button, reads through my document, looks for any potential issues that need to be corrected, and then ultimately fixes those issues for me. We can see that in this case, we're going to go through and correct the numbering issues that were identified by our analysis tools here. And then as we go through and make those corrections, you'll notice that our analysis indicates that those numbering issues have been corrected. Now, we have a couple of additional buttons in here. We have the ability to go through and do things like create tables of authorities or tables of contents. You'll notice that this document has an opportunity to create a table of contents, so we'll go ahead and click our TOC button. And again, the goal is to give you really easy ways to go through and perform these common tasks. We're going to go ahead and insert this table of contents at the top of the document, and this is just going to quickly go through and insert that TOC for me. And I can move on to whatever my next step in this document's drafting lifecycle is. Now, before we move on to document comparison and document cleaning, I do want to take a step back and talk about the different proofing processes that might exist for transactional documents or litigation documents. So obviously we're in a transactional document here, but if we move over to an example litigation document, we can go through the same process. Now, for litigation documents, I've decided that I want to be able to go through and look for some additional issues, specifically citation issues. So you'll notice that I've added a tile that allows us to go through and identify those potential problems. And just like our transactional documents, we'll go through and be able to identify numbering issues. We'll be able to identify issues with names, dates, and things like that within the document. For example, here, we can see that this zip code is the incorrect zip code for Lombard, Illinois. And we can also go through and identify things like citation issues. So if I have an orphaned short form site, this is a short form site with no corresponding full site. Or if I have citations that are used out of order, for example, here I have a short form site that's used before a full site. We can start to go through and identify those potential problems. So some things will be consistent across different types of documents. If we're setting out definitions in a transactional document or litigation document, we're going to be looking for very similar problems, right? Terms that are used but haven't been defined, or are defined but haven't been used, or maybe are defined twice or multiple times. But ultimately, no matter what type of document we're proofing and reviewing, we want to give you tools that help you to identify errors before this document kicked out the door. Now let's head back into our MSA and finish out this document's life cycle. Now, I've gone through, I've made a bunch of changes, and maybe I'm ready to go through and present those changes to my collaborator. I want to go through and compare this document, quickly kick that comparison out the door, so that whoever I'm working with can easily see the changes that I've made. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start by clicking the Compare button. You'll notice I'm brought into Compare, and I can quickly go through, hit my OK button, and then begin this comparison. Now, ultimately, there's two different reasons that I might want to generate a comparison. The first is to identify changes that somebody else made, and the second is to show changes that I've made to somebody else. Now, if I'm going through that first workflow and I need to identify changes that somebody else has made, there's a couple of different really useful things that I want to mention in here. The first is the change summary, specifically the different views within the change summary. You'll notice that we start in a category view. So if I want to do things like quickly look at changes associated with currency or negotiables, I can select that category. If I want to use the list view, I can quickly go through and see all of the changes in the document in a linear way. I can even search for individual items that may have changed if I know exactly what I'm looking for. But ultimately what this gives us is a really easy way to identify changes when we may not be 100% familiar with what has changed between the original and modified versions of this document. Now in the workflow that we're going through, we're trying to accomplish the second task. We need to go through and show the changes that we've made to someone that we're collaborating with. In that scenario, I can go through and quickly save this off. I can save it either as a PDF or a Word document with track changes. But one of my favorite features for collaboration is this email button. This allows me to quickly go through and bundle up whatever versions of this document I want. Maybe I want the modified document as a docx, I want the redline document as a PDF, and I want to change these names. So I'm going to give them both friendly and easy to read names. I can make those selections and make those changes, click OK, and then this is going to automatically bundle those two attachments into an email for me. And you can see here I've got an email, it's been loaded into my Outlook client. I can decide where to send this and then ultimately kick this out the door. Right, so really easy to go through and generate those comparisons and then ultimately send this to whoever I need to send it to. Now the last thing that I want to mention as we talk about our document drafting lifecycle is this need to make sure that the documents that we're sending outside of our organization are secure and clean. There are tons of stories that we can tell and that you can find in the news about documents that are poorly redacted when information we don't mean to share is accidentally leaked. And ultimately that's because someone hasn't properly cleaned the metadata from the documents that we're sharing. So when it comes to metadata cleaning and document protection, most of this, 90% of this, happens silently. When I go to send an email to someone outside my organization, I can know that when I attach that document and click send, my email is being cleaned. So I don't have to worry whether I'm sending from a mobile device, like a tablet or a phone, whether I'm sending from the Office 365 web app. No matter what, because of the way that we do metadata cleaning, I can know that every single email, every single attachment I'm sending outside the organization is being cleaned. And for 90% of emails, the workflow that we just saw will be the experience. It's grab the email, attach the document, and click send. Now, sometimes there's going to be metadata within an email that we need a little bit more guidance on, right? We need to hear from the person sending that email what they want to do with that metadata. So let's go ahead and attach something else to this email. And when we click send on this one, you're going to notice that the experience is slightly different. That's because there's metadata in this document that I might need in order to effectively collaborate. Now we call this alertable metadata because we're alerting the person sending the email that there's metadata that they might want to give some input on. Now you'll notice in this document we have track changes and comments, and that's what we've identified. I can go through and quickly decide if I did intend to collaborate with this person and keep these items in. Well, I can go ahead and select leave on either one. If I wanted to scrub these out, I could say accept all and delete. So I can go through and make whatever selections I want to, click OK. And again, that email goes right out the door. There's no processing happening on my computer, so I don't have to wait. Now, the last thing I want to mention here is that oftentimes there is some pain associated with the process of managing attachments to an email. Let's go ahead and generate an email that has a bunch of attachments on it. Now you can see here we've got an email with a bunch of attachments. If I wanted to go through and make changes to these attachments, it's actually really challenging. I can't rename these items, I can't reorder these items. If I haven't already converted them to PDF, there's not an option to do that in Outlook on its own. When we click into our Litera tab, you'll notice that I have my attachment manager functionality. This lets me go through and take some of those common actions that I might need to take as I prepare to send this email. So if I want to rearrange things, maybe I want the Word documents grouped together, well, I can drag and drop. If I want to rename things, maybe I want to call these metadata 1, 2, and 3, then I can go through and make those changes. I can decide if I want to do things like convert to PDF, password protect, or add to a PDF binder. And then once I go through and make the changes that I intend to make, I can click apply and reattach, and those changes will be reflected in my email attachments. Right? So ultimately the goal here is to make sure that we're properly cleaning and securing documents that are being sent outside the organization, but we also want to give you easy ways to go through and take some of those actions that you may be taking in Outlook today that take a lot of time. Now this rounds out the end of the document lifecycle wheel that we saw earlier. as we move from document creation into document checking and then ultimately collaborating on documents, hopefully this is giving you some good context for what Litera Desktop can do. If you have any questions in follow-up, please feel free to reach out to Litera.